It was one of those hot afternoons when the sun seemed to hang heavy in the sky, pouring down endless heat onto the streets. People walked quickly, trying to find shade, fanning themselves with newspapers or rushing into shops with air conditioning. On the sidewalk near a small cafe, a young girl stood quietly. She looked no different from any other teenager on the street. She wore a plain t-shirt, simple jeans, and sneakers that had been worn for a while. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she carried a small backpack slung over one shoulder. She didn't say a word to anyone. She just stood there calm and patient as though waiting for someone. The cafe door opened and closed every few seconds with customers going in and out, sipping on iced coffees and cold drinks. The girl glanced at the cafe but didn't move. She seemed content standing exactly where she was, her hands loosely folded in front of her. The people around her barely noticed her. Some were too busy with their phones, others rushing to their destinations. Just then, a police car pulled up at the corner. A tall officer stepped out. He was in full uniform, with his cap tilted slightly forward and his sunglasses covering his eyes. His boots tapped against the pavement as he walked with the kind of confidence that demanded attention. He glanced around as if surveying his surroundings, but his gaze soon settled on the girl. He slowed his steps when he reached her. For a moment, he simply studied her with a strange look, as though trying to figure out what she was doing standing there. The girl kept her posture calm, not even shifting under his stare. "You lost or something?" he asked in a voice that carried more authority than kindness. The girl shook her head gently. "No, sir. I'm fine." Her tone was polite, soft, and steady. The officer tilted his head, his lips curving into a small smirk. He seemed unimpressed by her calm answer. The heat of the day had already made him restless, and now his attention was fixed on her. He pulled a bottle of water from his belt holder, twisted off the cap, and took a slow sip while keeping his eyes on her. After a pause, he let out a short laugh. "Standing around in this heat isn't smart," he said. "People might think you don't belong here." The girl didn't answer. She only adjusted the strap of her backpack, her expression remaining calm. The officer's smirk deepened. For reasons unknown to anyone else, he suddenly tilted the bottle and poured some of the cold water down toward her feet, letting the drops splash onto her sneakers and jeans. A few drops even touched her hands. It wasn't an accident. He did it on purpose, and he leaned back slightly as if proud of himself. People nearby saw it happen. A couple sitting outside the cafe looked at each other with uncomfortable expressions. A delivery man who was walking by slowed down and frowned, but then quickly moved along. The officer's badge and uniform made them all hesitate. No one dared to step in. The girl looked down at the water drops, then back up at the officer. Her expression didn't change. There was no anger in her eyes, no raised voice, no sign of frustration. Instead, there was a stillness that almost felt heavier than any outburst. "Didn't expect you to stay quiet," the officer said, raising his eyebrows as if trying to provoke her. "Most people would be upset. But you just stand there." The girl simply replied, "I don't see a reason to be upset." Her voice was calm, but there was a strength behind it, a weight that wasn't easy to notice at first. Her answer unsettled him in a way he didn't expect. For a man used to being in control of every interaction, her calmness seemed like a mirror reflecting his own behavior back at him. He didn't like it. He shifted on his feet, took another sip from the bottle, and muttered something under his breath. From across the street, an older woman who had been watching whispered to her friend, "She's so brave. I don't know how she's keeping so calm." Her friend nodded but said nothing. The tension in the air was thick, even though the girl herself remained as steady as a rock. The officer finally stepped back, tucking his water bottle away. "Well, don't stand around too long," he said, his tone half warning, half mocking. "People might start asking questions." He tapped the edge of his cap, turned, and walked back toward his car. The girl stood still for a few moments after he left. She adjusted her backpack again, took a slow breath, and looked around. She noticed the stares of the people who had witnessed the scene. Some quickly looked away, embarrassed that they hadn't spoken up. A young man with a laptop bag gave her a small nod of respect before walking on. The girl's face softened into the faintest smile, though only for a second. Then she returned to her calm, composed expression. She wasn't rattled. If anything, her silence had given her the upper hand in a situation designed to humiliate her. As the police car drove away, the city noise returned to normal, cars honking, people chatting, and footsteps echoing on the pavement. But for those who had seen what just happened, the moment lingered in their minds. The sight of a simple girl staying strong under disrespect said more than any loud reaction could have. Inside the cafe, a man whispered to his friend. She didn't flinch. Did you see that? She just stood there. That was incredible. The girl eventually turned and walked slowly down the street. Every step she took was steady, confident, and purposeful. She looked like any other ordinary teenager on her way to somewhere else. Yet if anyone had looked a little closer, they might have noticed the subtle authority in the way she carried herself. It was as if she knew something no one else did. She reached the end of the block and paused for a moment, looking back toward the direction where the officer had gone. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in quiet reflection. She was not just a girl on the sidewalk. She was more than that, and soon the officer would realize it too. For now she kept her secret safe. The streets buzzed around her, life carrying on as usual. No one suspected that beneath her simple clothes and calm demeanor, she held a role that would shock everyone once revealed. And while the officer went about his day thinking the matter was over, he had no idea that his careless actions had just set the stage for a lesson he would never forget. The officer returned to his car, leaning against the door with a smirk still on his face. He pulled out his phone, scrolling casually, but his thoughts lingered on the moment. To him, it was just another example of his power. He liked to believe that his uniform gave him the right to act however he pleased, especially when dealing with people he thought were powerless. Inside, his pride grew. He thought about how the girl hadn't spoken up, hadn't shouted, hadn't even complained. To him, silence meant victory. In his mind, she had accepted his behavior. He convinced himself she must have been too afraid to speak against him. He chuckled quietly, proud of himself, and drove away from the cafe with a sense of superiority. Back at the station later that afternoon, he carried the same attitude. He strolled through the hallways with his chest puffed out, greeting some of his colleagues with a sly grin. A few of them noticed his unusual mood and asked what had made him so pleased. "Nothing serious," he replied, waving his hand dismissively. "Just a little situation outside the cafe. Put someone in their place, that's all." Some of the officers raised their eyebrows but didn't question him further. They were used to his arrogance. For months, maybe even years, they had watched him behave the same way, bossing people around, cutting corners, acting as though his badge was a shield against accountability. Some disapproved quietly, but few dared to confront him. His confidence, paired with the fear of retaliation, kept most people silent. In his locker room, he laughed while retelling the story to another officer. He exaggerated his actions, saying the girl looked shocked and embarrassed when he poured water on her. "She just stood there," he bragged. Didn't even dare to say a word. That's what happens when people realize who has the authority. The other officer gave a small, uncomfortable smile. He didn't agree with the behavior, but he didn't challenge it either. Instead, he changed the subject, hoping to steer the conversation away. But the arrogant officer barely noticed. He was too wrapped up in his own sense of power. Meanwhile, outside of the station, the city carried on as usual. People hurried home from work. Children played in small parks, and life looked ordinary on the surface. Yet the memory of the cafe scene stayed alive among those who had witnessed it. The couple at the cafe told their friends about the officer's actions, shaking their heads in disbelief. The delivery man who had passed by later mentioned it to a co-worker, expressing frustration at how unfairly the girl had been treated. Word began to spread quietly, carried by whispers. The girl, on the other hand, was not concerned with gossip or complaints. She moved through her day with the same calm expression she had shown at the cafe. But beneath her quiet exterior, she carried a strong awareness of everything that had happened. Every glance, every word, every drop of water poured carelessly by the officer had been stored in her mind like evidence. She had not reacted in the moment because she did not need to. She had bigger plans. Back at the station, the arrogant officer's reputation was growing, though not in the way he believed. Some officers spoke in hushed tones about his behavior, wondering how long it would be before someone higher up took notice. His arrogance was beginning to create cracks in the trust between him and his colleagues. While he thought he commanded respect, what he truly inspired was discomfort and unease. Later that evening, as the sun set and shadows stretched across the streets, the officer stopped at a diner near the station. He sat at the counter, boasting once again to the waitress about his tough day. He didn't realize how hollow his stories sounded to those who had heard them many times before. The waitress nodded politely, refilling his coffee, but her eyes betrayed her lack of admiration. He left a few minutes later, stepping back into the cooling night air. As he walked to his car, a thought crossed his mind, an unusual flicker of unease. The girl's calm face returned to his memory. He remembered how she hadn't looked away, hadn't trembled, hadn't begged. Something about her silence had unsettled him, though he brushed it off quickly. She was nothing, he muttered to himself, starting his engine. Just another nobody. But that nagging thought refused to fade completely. Across town, the girl prepared for the evening. She laid her simple clothes aside and opened a small case tucked in the corner of her apartment. Inside was a neatly pressed uniform, polished boots, and a badge that gleamed under the dim light. She touched the badge gently, her expression firm and steady. Tomorrow she would wear it openly. Tomorrow the truth would begin to surface. At the station, rumors circulated about a new senior official who was scheduled to visit soon. No one knew much about the person, only that someone with high authority had been moving quietly through different districts, reviewing officer behavior and community complaints. The arrogant officer, however, paid little attention. He assumed the meeting was just another routine formality. The night grew darker and the city's noises softened. Yet tension hung in the air like an invisible thread, connecting the girl, the officer, and the events that were about to unfold. One carried arrogance and false pride. The other carried truth and hidden authority. Their paths were set to cross again, but this time the balance of power would be very different. The officer returned home, tossing his cap onto the table and loosening his boots. He glanced in the mirror and admired his reflection. Still the toughest one on the job, he muttered to himself. He believed his actions earlier had proven his dominance once again. He never realized that the girl he mocked was about to reveal a truth that would shake his entire sense of power. And while he drifted into sleep with misplaced pride, the girl sat quietly at her desk, reviewing reports and preparing notes for the upcoming meeting. She wasn't preparing for revenge. She was preparing for justice. Her patience at the cafe had not been weakness, it had been wisdom. She knew that silence at the right moment could be louder than shouting, and soon, her silence would transform into authority so strong that even the proudest officer would be forced to bow his head. The next morning started like any other at the police station. Officers came in one after another, greeting each other, grabbing coffee from the small kitchen and flipping through paperwork. The air buzzed with chatter, but beneath it was a ripple of curiosity. Everyone knew there was a big meeting scheduled that afternoon. The higher-ups had said a new senior official was going to visit. No one had been told who exactly, but the word chief was mentioned, and that alone was enough to stir speculation. Some officers whispered guesses as they passed each other in the hallway. Maybe it's someone from the capital, one suggested. Or maybe they're bringing in someone to shake things up, another muttered. The arrogant officer, however, didn't seem worried. He leaned casually against his desk, sipping coffee and making jokes about the mystery visitor. "Whoever it is," he said loudly, "they'll find out soon enough who runs this place. Everyone knows I've got this station under control." His colleagues gave weak smiles. Not because they agreed, but because they didn't want to argue with him. The hours ticked by, and the station grew quieter as the meeting time approached. Officers began to gather in the large conference room. Rows of chairs filled quickly and the atmosphere became tense. Everyone wanted to see who the new leader was and whether their arrival meant changes were coming. The arrogant officer sat near the front, legs crossed, arms folded, his face smug with confidence. He whispered to the man next to him, probably just some bureaucrat in a suit. "They'll talk for an hour and leave. Nothing new." At that exact moment, the doors at the back of the room opened. Every head turned. A figure stepped inside, dressed in full police uniform. Her boots clicked against the polished floor, and her posture carried undeniable authority. She walked calmly, her face serious, her eyes scanning the room. The arrogant officer's smirk froze. His eyes widened as he recognized her instantly. It was the same girl he had mocked, the same one he had poured water on the day before. But she didn't look like the girl from the cafe anymore. She looked like a leader, every detail of her uniform shining with command. Gasps spread across the room. Officers glanced at each other in disbelief, whispering under their breaths. No one had expected this. The young woman they had dismissed as ordinary was, in fact, their new police chief in disguise. She reached the front of the room, stood tall, and placed her hands on the table. The room fell silent. Even the sound of breathing seemed to pause. With a steady voice, she introduced herself. "My name is Chief Williams," she said firmly. "From this day forward, I will be serving as your commanding officer. I have been assigned here to review this station's conduct, discipline, and commitment to the community. Some of you may already know me by face, though not by title." Her eyes swept across the room, and for a moment they locked with the arrogant officers. He looked down quickly, his confidence draining away. His hands, which had been folded proudly on his chest moments ago, now fidgeted nervously in his lap. Chief Williams continued, "Yesterday I tested this community. I walked the streets without my uniform, without my badge, and without revealing my title. I wanted to see how I would be treated. What I experienced revealed a lot more than I expected." The officers exchanged nervous glances. They knew something big was coming. Chief Williams paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then she said, "One of your own decided that his uniform gave him the right to humiliate me. He poured water on me in public in front of witnesses with complete disregard for respect, dignity, or humanity. He thought I was powerless. He thought I was invisible. But he was wrong." All eyes turned toward the arrogant officer. His face grew pale. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, wishing he could disappear. His colleagues now stared at him with wide eyes, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Chief Williams raised her chin slightly. "That man is sitting in this room right now, and today he will answer for his actions." The room was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. The arrogant officer finally looked up, his lips parting as though to defend himself, but the words stuck in his throat. He had built his pride on the idea that no one could challenge him. But here she was, calm, authoritative, and holding all the power he thought belonged only to him. She turned back to the others. "This is not just about one incident. This is about a culture that allows arrogance to replace service. A uniform is not a weapon. A badge is not a shield to hide behind. We are here to protect, not to oppress. We are here to respect, not to humiliate. If we cannot do that, then we do not deserve this badge." Her words echoed through the room, sharp and clear. Some officers nodded slowly, while others bowed their heads in shame. Many had witnessed the arrogance of their colleague before, but they had never seen it exposed so directly. The arrogant officer's heart pounded, sweat beaded on his forehead. He wanted to speak, to explain, to twist the story in his favor, but he knew the truth was already against him. People had seen what he did. Witnesses had watched in silence, but silence was no longer his protection. Chief Williams stepped closer to him. Her eyes locked on his, unwavering. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. He stuttered, struggling to form words. I didn't realize. I thought..." His voice trailed off. For the first time in years, he felt small, stripped of the authority he had always relied on. His arrogance had turned into fear. Chief Williams didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence, paired with her steady gaze, was enough to crush the last fragments of his pride. She then turned to the others. "Let this be a lesson," she said. "Respect must be given to every citizen, regardless of who they are or how they look. Because you never truly know who stands before you. It might be a leader, a judge, a teacher, or simply a human being deserving of dignity, and that should always be enough." The officers in the room sat quietly, the weight of her words sinking deep. Some exchanged looks that carried a silent agreement. Things would not be the same under her leadership. The arrogant officer lowered his head, his shoulders slumped. He knew his career was hanging by a thread. The room that once gave him admiration now looked at him with disappointment. His laughter from yesterday seemed like a distant memory. The meeting ended with Chief Williams dismissing the group. "Return to your duties. From today forward, we rebuild trust. Not just within this station, but with the people we serve." As the officers filed out, whispers filled the air. Some shook their heads at the officer's downfall. Others expressed admiration for Chief Williams' strength. But one thing was clear. Her presence had already changed everything. The arrogant officer remained in his seat, frozen, as the reality of his situation sank deeper. His arrogance had led him to believe he was untouchable. Now, he understood that respect was not demanded by force. It was earned through honor, and he had lost it. The conference room emptied slowly, but the tension it carried did not leave. Officers walked back to their desks with heavy thoughts, and whispers spread across the station like ripples in water. For years, arrogance and abuse of power had been ignored, but today something had shifted. Chief Williams had spoken with a strength that no one could dismiss. The arrogant officer, however, stayed in his seat long after the meeting ended. His head was lowered, his pride shattered. For the first time, he was not the one in control. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes that had looked at him in disappointment. His chest, once puffed with pride, now felt heavy with shame. Chief Williams remained at the front of the room, reviewing her notes. She did not rush. Her calm presence filled the silence like a steady drumbeat. Finally, she closed her folder and walked toward him. Her boots echoed on the polished floor, each step reminding him that she was in command. She stopped in front of him. "Stand up," she said firmly. His hands trembled slightly as he rose to his feet. He avoided her gaze, staring instead at the floor. "Look at me," she commanded. Slowly, he lifted his eyes to meet hers. For years he had looked at others with arrogance, but now his gaze was filled with fear and regret. "Do you understand what you did yesterday?" Chief Williams asked, her voice calm but sharp. He swallowed hard. I was careless. I didn't mean—" She raised her hand, stopping him. "Don't make excuses. You poured water on me in public. You mocked me. You humiliated someone you thought had no power. That was not carelessness. That was a choice. A choice made with arrogance, not with service." Her words cut deeper than any shout could have. He shifted uncomfortably, wishing the floor would open and swallow him whole. "You wear this uniform," she continued, pointing to the badge on his chest, "to serve and protect, not to degrade, not to abuse, not to feed your pride. When you dishonor this uniform, you dishonor every honest officer who sacrifices their life for this community." He nodded quickly, his lips trembling. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Sorry is not enough," Chief Williams replied, her eyes narrowing. "Do you know what happened after you poured that water? People saw it," they whispered. "They lost trust, not just in you, but in this badge. Every officer in this station pays the price for your arrogance." Her words struck him harder than any punishment he could imagine. For the first time, he understood that his actions had consequences beyond himself. He had damaged the image of the very institution he claimed to represent. The door opened quietly, and a few senior officers entered the room. They stood to the side, watching silently. Chief Williams addressed them without turning her gaze from the disgraced officer. "This man has displayed conduct unworthy of his uniform," she said. "He will face investigation. He will be removed from duty until the review is complete." The officer's eyes widened. His knees felt weak. He tried to speak, his voice breaking. "Please, Chief, give me another chance. I'll change, I swear. Don't take my badge, this job. It's all I have." Chief Williams studied him for a moment, her face unreadable. Then she spoke with steady firmness. "You should have thought of that before you abused it. A badge is not a shield for arrogance. It is a promise to the people. And when that promise is broken, there are consequences." Tears welled up in his eyes, though he quickly blinked them back, trying to hold on to the last threads of dignity. He had begged before, but never like this. His voice carried desperation, not pride. "Chief," he said, almost choking on his words, "I've worked here for years. I've given my life to this job. Don't end it like this, please." Chief Williams took a step closer. Her voice softened, but it still carried authority. "Do you know why I didn't shout at you yesterday? Do you know why I stayed calm when you poured that water?" He shook his head slowly. "Because power is not proven by anger. Power is proven by control. Anyone can lose their temper. True strength is staying calm when others try to break you. Yesterday I showed restraint. Today I am showing justice." Her words sank deep into his heart. He lowered his head, ashamed of his own weakness. The senior officers stepped forward, guiding him gently out of the room. As he walked, his colleagues avoided his eyes. Some looked at him with disappointment, others with pity. For the first time, he felt truly alone. Chief Williams remained behind, addressing the room once more. "Let this station understand," she said, her voice carrying through the halls. "We will not tolerate arrogance. We will not tolerate disrespect. From this day forward, every officer here will remember that service is built on respect. If you cannot honor that, you do not belong here." Her message traveled far beyond the walls of the station. Later that evening, officers shared her words with their families, with neighbors, and with community members. The story spread quickly, about a police chief who went undercover, who exposed arrogance and who stood firm for justice. People began to speak of her with admiration, saying she was the kind of leader the city needed. Meanwhile, the disgraced officer sat alone in a small room, waiting for the investigation to begin. His pride was gone, replaced by regret. He replayed the moment at the cafe again and again in his mind. Every detail haunted him. The water splashing on her shoes, her calm eyes looking back at him, her silence that had cut deeper than any words. He wished he could turn back time, but it was too late. For Chief Williams, however, the journey was only beginning. She knew the fight against arrogance and corruption was far from over. But she also knew that every step forward mattered. If one officer could be reminded that respect must come before pride, then change was possible. The night fell quiet over the city, but in the station, a new chapter had begun. One built not on arrogance but on accountability. One led by a chief who had proven that dignity, even in silence, could be stronger than any act of pride. The following days at the station were unlike any before. The halls that once echoed with casual arrogance now carried an atmosphere of discipline and reflection. Officers spoke in quieter tones, their steps more purposeful. The presence of Chief Williams had changed the entire rhythm of the place. The disgraced officer, now under suspension, was no longer seen in uniform. His locker was locked, his desk cleared, and his absence felt heavy. For years he had strutted through the station with pride, certain of his untouchable status. Now his name was whispered only as a warning. Many who had once laughed at his crude jokes or silently watched his behavior began to realize how deeply wrong they had been to allow it. Chief Williams continued her work, not with loud punishments but with steady leadership. She spent her mornings walking the halls, speaking to officers one by one, asking about their roles, their goals, and their challenges. For the first time in a long time, many felt that their voices were heard. She reminded them gently but firmly that respect was the foundation of their duty. At the same time, she reached out to the community. She visited the cafe where the incident had occurred, speaking to the staff and customers who had witnessed it. She didn't demand their trust, she earned it. She listened to their concerns, promised reform, and assured them that arrogance would no longer be tolerated. The people, surprised to see a leader so approachable, began to feel hope. News of her undercover act spread across the city. Local newspapers wrote about the chief in disguise who had exposed misconduct. Community leaders praised her courage and wisdom, saying she was the kind of leader the force needed to restore honor. Parents told their children about her calm strength, and young students admired her for standing tall without shouting or fighting. Meanwhile, the disgraced officer sat at home, replaying everything in his mind. His pride was gone, replaced by deep regret. He thought about all the times he had chosen arrogance over respect, power over service. He realized now that each of those choices had built the path to his downfall. He had begged for forgiveness, but he knew it would take more than words to undo the damage he had caused. For the first time in his career, he understood the weight of the badge he had worn so carelessly. Back at the station, Chief Williams held a meeting with the entire department. She stood at the front once again, but this time her words carried a message of rebuilding. "We cannot erase the mistakes of the past," she said, her voice steady, "but we can learn from them. We can grow from them, and we can make sure they never happen again. This badge must always stand for justice, this uniform must always stand for dignity, and this station must always stand for respect." The officers listened closely, some with bowed heads, others with eyes fixed on her in admiration. They felt the weight of her words, but also the hope they carried. For the first time in years, the station felt united under a vision that was larger than pride or arrogance. She announced new training programs focused on humility, community service, and ethical conduct. She created channels for citizens to voice their concerns safely, promising that every complaint would be reviewed seriously. She also set up mentorship sessions where senior officers would guide younger ones, not in arrogance but in true service. Day by day, change began to take root. Slowly, the community's trust grew stronger. People who once avoided calling the station now felt encouraged to reach out. Officers who had once looked the other way when misconduct happened began to step forward, reporting what they saw. The culture of silence started to break, replaced by accountability. As for the disgraced officer, his case was reviewed thoroughly. He faced hearings, testimonies, and the weight of his own actions. In front of the review board, he broke down in tears, admitting everything. He confessed his arrogance, his mistakes, and the harm he had caused. For the first time, he showed humility. Though he begged for another chance, the decision was firm. He was removed from the force. The badge he had once taken for granted was taken away, and with it, the authority he had misused. The news spread quickly, and while some pitied him, most saw it as justice. It was a reminder that no one was above accountability, and that respect must be earned, not demanded. Chief Williams did not gloat over his downfall. She spoke of it only once to the officers under her command. "Let his story remind us all," she said, "that arrogance destroys but respect builds. We must choose which path we walk every day." Months passed and the station transformed. Officers worked harder, spoke kinder, and carried themselves with renewed pride. Not false pride, but the pride that comes from doing what is right. The community noticed the difference. Where once there had been fear and mistrust, there was now cautious hope, growing stronger each day. One afternoon, Chief Williams returned to the cafe where it all began. The staff welcomed her warmly, offering her a seat by the window. A young boy approached her shyly and said, "My mom told me about you. She said you're brave because you don't let people push you down." Chief Williams smiled, bending down to meet his eyes. "Bravery isn't about fighting back," she told him gently. "It's about standing strong even when someone tries to push you down. Remember that." The boy nodded, his eyes wide with admiration. As she sipped her coffee, she looked out at the street where the officer had once poured water on her. The memory no longer carried pain. Instead, it carried purpose. She knew that sometimes life tested leaders in unexpected ways. What mattered most was not how loudly they responded, but how wisely they chose their silence, and how firmly they stood when the time came to reveal the truth. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the street. Chief Williams rose, paid her bill, and stepped outside. People passing by recognized her now, offering smiles and nods of respect. She returned each greeting with calm warmth. She walked with quiet confidence, not needing to prove her power to anyone. She didn't need to raise her voice or display her authority. Her dignity spoke louder than any badge could, and as she moved through the city, the lesson of her story remained: respect every human being, because you never know who they truly are. For the officer who had once poured water with arrogance, the lesson came too late. But for everyone else who had witnessed the journey, the message would last a lifetime.